Ladies and gentlemen, can I just call everyone to order, please? We always try to do things differently in Manchester, and I think this event is an exemplification of that approach, really. I spoke to Stephen. Well, last year I participated in a series of conversations with Stephen in his role as RIBA president and all of that. Actually hosted somewhere else on the Croisette. And I just thought, well, here's a great idea about how not only can we create new platforms for inclusive participation for the wider partnership, but also actually start to reinforce our position as intellectual thought leaders by actually starting to debate some of the key issues around the day. And I talked to Stephen about this, and we agreed that a series of seminars about the key issues of the day would actually be very, very appropriate. And Stephen's very kindly agreed to host and chair and convene these sessions that will take place this week. And also, if I may say so, work, as he has, incredibly hard with many of my colleagues to actually pull together the necessary background and the material which we're actually going to debate this week. So it's my great pleasure not only to introduce Stephen, but to, again, on behalf of the partnership, to thank him for all the work he's done to make this a reality. Stephen Hodder.
Thank you, Howard. Yes, it has been a challenge putting all this together over the last few months. But good morning, everybody, and it's just so great to see so many people here. As Howard said, I'm now immediate past president of the RIBA, but director of Hodder+Partners Architects in Manchester, and I was really quite delighted when Howard invited me to chair these conversation pieces, and we're going to run these over the 3 days here at MIPIM, exploring pertinent design and development issues, using three major projects in the city as vehicles for the discussion pieces. And each session will have a reviewer to offer perceptions from outside of the city. And these sessions are being held in conjunction with the Royal Institute of British Architects, I'm pleased to say. So, kicking us off, we're going to discuss future housing and how we accommodate the needs of future generations of city dwellers. We're going to take a specific look at NOMA in Manchester City Centre, where a really quite interesting new residential offer is developing as part of a diverse and mixed-use neighbourhood, all focused on creating a real community. Our panel presentation will then be followed by a guided discussion, and then I'm going to throw it open to the floor for a Q&A session. So, joining me today are David Pringle. David, do you want to come and sit on? David is the Co-op's Group Director of NOMA. He's responsible for NOMA, the 20-acre mixed-use neighbourhood in Manchester City Centre, being delivered in partnership with Hermes, developing 4 million square feet of homes, offices, shops, restaurants, hotels, and new public space. And as we all know, the first phase was the development of the group's 400,000 square feet BREEAM outstanding new head office, and of course that was accompanied by all the improvements to the ring road and the new public square at Sadlers Yard. But NOMA is far more than that. As we all know, it's, as I said, is mixed use, and I think the key component is in fact the delivery of the residential component, Moda Living, Angel Gardens development of 458 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. And then I want to introduce you to John Cooper, who's the director of Deloitte, LLP. John? Yeah. Yeah. Are you going to do? Right, okay, all right. I think everybody knows John, but he heads up the region's planning team at Deloitte Real Estate. He has extensive experience of handling complex planning applications and associated stakeholder engagement processes, and he's led the preparation of many of the City Council's strategic and neighbourhood regeneration framework documents. John is currently working with the City Council as part of a team advising on the preparation of a residential guidance for the city, which I'm pleased to say I'm chairing the steering group. We'll be quite interested to see how that evolves over the coming months, John. Mike Hitchmough, Architect Director of BDP Manchester. Mike's an architect who I've worked with for a number of years. Mike has a really great experience, not just as an architect, but also as a client. And that's extended over 25 years now. Prior to joining BDP, he worked with the co-op to develop the master plan concept for NOMA, and subsequently was responsible for leading the design and delivery of the headquarters building. And finally, I want to introduce you to Jack Pringle, Managing Director. Jack, you want to just, we can come and sit down again in a minute. Jack was the Managing Director for Europe, the Middle East and Africa at Perkins Wills. I was quite curious when I asked Jack, because I thought it would be quite interesting to have a very constructive and positive discussion. So inviting David's older brother, I thought would be quite an interesting component part of it. I'm only joking, Jack. Jack worked with Sir Philip Powell at Powell & Moyer for 8 years. He started up his own practice in 1986, which became Pringle Brandon. And in 2012, Pringle Brandon successfully completed a merger with Perkins Will. I think the interesting thing with Jack being on the panel is that he's particularly interested in new technologies and how they drive work practices, how smart premises design can support business objectives, and how work, recreation, and living are becoming integrated in urban life, leading to a new working and residential typologies. Jack is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a member of the American Institute of Architecture, and of course is past president of the RIBA. And in 2012, Jack took the chair of the Construction Industry Council for a 2-year term. So that's the panel. I'm now going to hand over to David, who's going to do a 15-minute presentation, and then we'll come back up and have a discussion. David.
Well, good morning, everybody. We've come a long way over the centuries. Our needs have evolved as technology has influenced all of our lives. From caves through to modern Burj Khalifa type plans. So who is Generation Z? It's a post-millennials. It's those born anywhere between the late 1990s and 2010s. So the defining factor about this generation is that the kids are growing up in a hyper-connected world. They've grown up with the internet, with touchscreen as standard, where information, communication, and content-rich experiences are literally at their fingertips. And this is who we need to home in the future. So what are the big questions we need to be asking ourselves? How should this affect how we think about housing, both in the future, but also now? And how do we build that into design? For me, it all comes back to one thing, and this is whatever generation we're thinking about, we all strive for quality of life. Somewhere that we're going to be happy, and somewhere where we can lead the types of lives we want to lead. And Manchester is working hard to deliver that quality and that difference of offer. We do pretty well in Manchester, named the best UK city to live in, and again in last year's Global Livability Survey as a top 10 city in the world to visit. That's according to the Lonely Planet Guide. In 2009, the city's independent economic review stated that Greater Manchester had the potential to become the economic engine of the North, and I think we're seeing that in spades at the moment. There's been growth in key areas: science, media, education, professional services and culture. And there are big plans to ensure the delivery of sustained economic growth with the devolution and Northern Powerhouse. But there's still lots to do. People and talent are the key to the economic story of the city, and attracting them and keeping them is the challenge. And this is what we've been thinking about at NOMA, and it's been underpinning what we want to deliver. So, a few thoughts on me on city living in the future based around our thinking at NOMA. We're in a great position to actually answer the challenges of a growing urban city. As can be seen from the map, Manchester can extend its city boundaries and support residential growth. We're bridging the outlying districts into the city centre on pre-developed land. So we've got Collyhurst, New Cross, the Lower Irk Valley, strategic regeneration plans which have been promoted by the city to create that additional residential offer. But what we've got to think really carefully about is we deliver the right diversity of offer, and it's not just simply a PRS scheme. We're already working with Manchester Place to extend the city centre from NOMA into the northern areas of Manchester, with 4 plots around Angel Meadows Park, beginning to create those connections to the Lower Irk Valley, New Cross and Collyhurst. People need to be connected, physically, digitally, and of course with each other. Transport links will continue to be a prime factor. We've had significant investment in transport infrastructure, Victoria Station, the second city crossing, Northern Hub, Ortal Cord. We've also seen major road improvements. There's not just major infrastructure works to consider, however. It's the health and well-being agenda, making it easier for people to walk and cycle and connect with the city centre without having to jump into a car. We must also consider the connectivity of the fibre kind. According to the 2016 Digital Economy and Society Index, scores which were released in February, the UK has fallen behind other European cities and countries in terms of connectivity, digital skills and the integration of digital technology. So the digital challenge is on, and we have to grow our digital offer again, and Manchester is at the forefront of that. NOMA's digital strategy is to make NOMA the best connected location in the UK. We're quite proud to say that having worked with the City Council, we've put in the infrastructure now so that we can deliver high-speed fibre optic 1 gigabyte per second, super fast internet speeds, but equally important to us was to give people the choice, so you're not limited to one provider. We've got 3 or 4 different providers who can actually deliver that service. Later this year, we'll have a fantastic quality-free public Wi-Fi offer, hopefully delivering similar speeds. And we've been working with Magnetic North in order to offer occupiers, residents and visitors best-in-class smart city thinking. We've also started construction on 70,000 square feet of quirky warehouse-type workspace in Federation, ideal for tech, digital and creative businesses. Great spaces and amenities are key. Outside space is a premium in any city centre, and it continues to influence design in all major developments, featuring roof gardens, enhanced communal spaces and public realm, all there to try to draw in people and allow them to live and breathe in the city. We've worked with Manchester City Council and ERDF to radically improve streetscapes, pedestrian routes and parks around NOMA, helping it become a place you can work, live and play in. Last year I stood here and showed you a video of how our public square would look. Now Sadlers Yard has transformed former underused streets and vacant garage buildings into a beautifully designed yet intimate city space, right in the heart of NOMA. And we're just about to start kicking off some great public events in spring. Just flash past the Crow Pub, a unique concept, local people signing up to workshops to build the pub themselves, crowdsourced volunteering, and each of the workshops are massively oversubscribed. It's been a great success. But for me, this whole thought process is now beginning to think about driving real mixed uses, not just in neighbourhoods, so not just buildings of offices, buildings of residential. They need to become integrated. Hafen City is a great example, realising the importance of injecting vibrancy into the heart of a city right at the start of schemes. And ultimately, we come back to the point that people need to be connected with each other. People do better when they're part of something. The fact that NOMA is creating a true mixed-use neighbourhood in Manchester city centre was a key factor for modal living when it came to locating their flagship PRS scheme at Angel Gardens. With funding in place, MODA are due to start site in early May. For us, the MODA scheme is a brilliant fit. It's not just a fantastic building which will define the city skyline, but it's the amenity that it's going to offer, which is at a whole different level for anything that's in the city at the moment. Their philosophy is all about creating community. But will this way of living instigate real social change? Is it all PRS? Do we not need to have a real mix of owner occupation, buy-to-let, PRS, mixed together within the same residential environment? I think there's challenges around social infrastructure as well. How do we get people to stay in the city? How do we provide for education, health and social needs? How do we ensure that the product diversity is there that will deliver it? Will the city's residential design guide help address some of these challenges? Before we get to the panel session, we thought we undertake a bit of informal research and ask some absolute experts as to what Generation Z think that they will want in their future homes.
There will be football pitches on the roofs of the houses, escalators instead of stairs, climbing frames in each room, Xbox Ones built in every single room, Xbox Live Gold 3 memberships, the Xbox Ones, PS4s in every room, and a spare room for visitors.
I would love to have a house made of wood. That's my dream, and then it would be painted blue.
And the door, when you look at it, it opens. And there's a lift so you don't have to walk up the stairs. And the bed that gets you dressed when you wake up in the morning.
When you buy your house, you'll have like a special remote, and on it will be a button, and every time you want to go in your house, you click the button and it will come to you, and then you can like ride it around.
Have washing machines that washes, dries and folds up clothes. The house of the future will be floating around, and every time you go in it, it will explode.
They covered connectivity, design and materials, amenities, digital and tech, and apparently we now need to start thinking about flying caravans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Brilliant film. I can tell you that the Xbox in every room has already arrived in our house. Right, if you'd like to join me back on, and I'm going to hand you over now to Jack, who's going to sort of debate some of the themes that David talked about, and then I'll throw it open for discussion in a short while. Jack has to leave for a prior engagement at 12:15, so when he disappears, it's not because he's disappointed with the discussion piece. Over to you, Jack.
Earlier, it's because I'm disappointed with the Steve, thank you very much for inviting me to come and ask a few questions. I am based in London, but coincidentally, I was in Manchester the very moment that you contacted me, looking at these sites. So I think I was fated to come along today, and I'm very pleased to be here. Clearly, we're all going to be in floating houses made of wood and with Xboxes round every corner. So we don't. The discussion is redundant now. We know the answers. Okay, first question up. This is a really interesting phenomenon that's happening with people wanting to live in towns. Actually, it's not just Generation Z. There's people downsizing, coming back into town. I'm always surprised when I look at the statistics of Manchester, because it's only 400,000 or 500,000 people live in town, but you've got a catchment area of over 2 million. So I think this move to urban living is really going to be a very powerful one. But what do people want when they come to live in a town? I mean, surely it's about the content and the services that a town can deliver. The urban living, it's about connection with people, it's about the music, it's about the education, it's about conviviality, it's about services. Are we integrating that stuff enough into the offers that we're providing? What does the residential offer of the future look like, and are we anywhere near it?
I think what's interesting, I've got a 14-year-old daughter, so I'm sort of tapping into that Generation Z on a live feed on a daily basis. But if I look 10 years ahead, maybe at what my daughter's going to be expecting of Manchester itself, I mean, I was a graduate in Manchester, stayed in the city, so in terms of that graduate retention, which we're all aware of, the city's got a fantastic calibre of higher education offer anyway, and then we keep those people in the city. I think it's almost 70% of graduate retention, plus we attract graduates from other cities into Manchester as well. But I think what does attract them to the city is that quality and diversity of offer, and that's home life, work life, play, leisure with friends, colleagues, after work, before work, weekend. I think that's something I've seen in the city develop and grow over the last decade, is how that sort of blurring of boundaries between those three aspects, all aspects of our lives, and overlaid on top of each other. David touched on it in the presentation about perhaps being a little bit bolder and more innovative in terms of how we structure our places, our buildings, so that we have that sort of proper mixed-use schemes. I mean, there's a fantastic scheme in Rotterdam, which is an apartment building over a market hall. This thing is a huge arch that goes 40 metres high, 120 metres long. And people live over the market and have windows in their floors which they can look down upon. There's a station just next door, so that really interests me. The diversity of offer and the space around buildings as well.
So what's Deloitte's take on all this?
Well, I think undoubtedly people want to live in the city centre as well, just to be close to the place of work. And there's been a huge amount of investment in transport, and that's now coming to fruition, and hopefully that's going to make life easier for people coming into Manchester. But it does get very congested in the morning, and I think there's absolutely no doubt.
Drives in.
That's right. So there's a real positive momentum to using the land that lies around the city centre. David talked about the Northern Fringe. There are vast swathes of land there that offer great potential for residential development. It's really well connected to the city centre. You can walk and cycle into the city centre. And there's an opportunity there, because these are areas that don't really have much at the moment in terms of development, to create the kinds of communities that are going to be really essential for Manchester to move forward and sustain this really strong economic growth trajectory that it is on at the moment. And I think what's attractive about Manchester, it has a really strong, a really diverse labour market offer. It has the skills. It also has a quality of life, and I think increasingly there's the link between quality of life and the price of living, average wage levels, etc. The balance has been good in Manchester, but clearly, it needs to deliver the housing to be able to sustain those levels into the future.
Correct. David Bro, you're at the epicenter of all of this, and we were talking a minute before we came on about this integration of work life, residential life, same sort of things going on in that. We've got WeWork coming over from the States, having hundreds of thousands of square feet of, entrepreneur startup with table tennis tables, and now it's Relive as well. They're integrating that. Do you think we're doing enough of that? Do you think Manchester's doing enough of that?
I think it's interesting. If you go back 5 years when we were looking at our master plan, traditional master plan thinking is mixed use, yes, but you have uses in different buildings. It's something I refer to. And Mike mentioned, for me now, the major developments, there's such a blurring between when you're working, particularly in the younger generations. I'm a bit hopeless at it, but they work, live at times and have leisure time to suit themselves. And there's a massive blurring between when they're at work.
That's what you need to work.
Absolutely.
You can do it anywhere.
Absolutely. And I just think that if you go back and some of the offers that we'll put forward going forward will be completely different. St John's and their Tower Village, it's that sort of idea where you're actually blurring the living and the working. And I just think that's where, if we're honest about NOMA, I think that's one area we can explore a bit further.
Okay.
I think sorry, just to add to that, I think there's also something about tenure and creating community.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about PRS, because we seem to be facing generation rent, and I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It has a lot of flexibility. I think the institutions are very keen on funding PRS because it solves institution investment problems.
Yeah.
But are we getting a monoculture of PRS? I mean, one thing it enables you to do is to bundle services in the offer.
Yeah.
But do we have enough diversity of tenure coming up in this next generation?
I think it's so important to have a good mix of even buy-to-lets, PRS, and home ownership. Certainly, Angel Meadow, when we deliver that, is likely to be for sale and aimed at home ownership, because I think that's what starts to create community. PRS is really good because the amenities it offers tends to make people stay longer. If they stay longer, they make friends, they build a community around there. So for me, a lot of this is just around creating the environment where people will want to live.
Okay.
I was going to say, I think PRS clearly has a role to play. I've already heard this morning some of the talks about how a lot of the growth in Manchester is being driven by a younger demographic. People coming into the city, the population is getting increasingly younger, and for many young people, unfortunately, the situation today is that the pathway to home ownership is quite a complex one. And the PRS model offers an alternative to that. And what it actually does as well is a lot of the PRS units have been specifically designed for sharers. So I think that's an important trend. It keeps the cost of renting the units down, because you can share with a friend more easily within a really high quality, well-managed apartment block that has lots of shared amenities.
Do you think it will lock people out of home ownership in the long run because it's so attractive and there's well-managed and curated environment?
There's an interesting question about whether this kind of shift in young people towards renting is actually a lifestyle choice. Because there are advantages around being completely flexible, not having a noose around your neck in terms of having a mortgage, and being able to spend your hard-earned pennies on other potentially more exciting things, like going on nice holidays and stuff like that. Is that what young people actually want, really? But I suspect that's probably not the case, and most young people still aspire to home ownership, but just can't quite get there. So potentially it's a pathway to home ownership.
So there's a bridging issue. What do you think, Mike?
I think the PRS model works very well for, I think, that younger demographic of people. You actually, let's not talk about graduates only, but these are people doing more vocational courses or degrees, so at the age of 18 to 24 or 30. And it does give people that flexibility. When you're finding your way in life, you don't know where you're going to be working. You change jobs a little bit more often when you're younger as well. So it gives people that opportunity to live in a place with a sense of community. Because I think that's what the PRS thing has lots of potential to do to offer that sort of, build that community managed by the building managers. And it's almost, I think the key thing in terms of managing the building and providing that community, I think if we could look towards the hospitality industry a little bit more and see how, you know, good hotels work and what levels of service that they give their guests. And because I think people expect that level of hospitality now in all aspects of their life. And I think if you can lock that into good building management as well to make these places really sort of come alive and thrive, then actually people get the best of both worlds. And also it was something David and I were talking about a couple of days ago about the flexibility, but not just in the way you can move apartments, you know, if you've got a 1-bedroom and you want to expand into a 2-bedroom, but actually what's quite interesting with the PRS model, because the building is under the ownership of one party, if in the fullness of time you wanted to knock into next door or take the apartment above, if you think of it as a commercial lease proposition like offices, you could have a conversation, or the landlord could have a conversation with the person next door, perhaps give them some incentive, you know, 3 months rent free or whatever, to move down the corridor or move somewhere else, so you can go next door and get a 3-bedroom. Or
they're going to be more liquid anyway. People will be coming and going. There's going to be opportunities. And
so I think it offers lots of diversity and opportunity that's not in the owner-occupier market.
Let's talk about Xboxes. But perhaps the bigger sort of dimension of Xboxes, but it's really interesting that came up so quickly in your film. You know, the digital agenda, I think you've got really fast broadband going into NOMA, was it gigabytes and goodness, whatever. But you know, is there a wider digital agenda that we're not really touching? You know, if you look at every other sphere of life, you know, the digital revolution has absolutely transformed how things work. You know, it's true in many ways that all companies are tech companies now. They're just tech companies in different sectors. And look how retail has been absolutely, amazingly changed by the use of technology. But, you know, the places we live and work seem to be sort of Neanderthal. I mean, we talk about smart cities, but actually I think we've got dumb cities. I mean, you're building a neighborhood. Are you going to have a smart neighborhood? And if so, is it going to be an oasis of inside a wider city that isn't really smart in the true sense?
I'm not sure what a smart neighbourhood is. You can hear it bandied around. I think what we're trying to achieve is a neighbourhood which is really connected. So connected to the wider digital community, but also connected with each other through digital means. And to do that, you lay the infrastructure. You put in place platforms where people can communicate with each other. We're looking at having a completely open service charge, as an example, a regime whereby you'll be able to see within the community what people are paying for service charges in different buildings. It's easily done, the technology's there. It's just actually putting in the hardware now in the buildings as we develop them. I think on your wider question, I think there's certain areas, and I think, Mike, you've done a bit on this, haven't you? Certain areas within Manchester which are super connected, but there's other islands which, Mike was saying, if you can get a dial-up connection, you're pretty lucky. Yeah. So I think it's got to be more than just one little bit as an oasis within a city. It's got to be widened out so everybody enjoys it.
Mike, what about BDP? What's your view on smart cities, smart communities?
Smart cities. I mean, I do think, there's been a lot of rhetoric in the press in recent weeks. BT, OpenReach, you know, whether it's it should be opened up. But if you look at the sort of digital agenda, Manchester's got a very strong digital economy. But we do, you know, I think the UK is the 5th largest economy in the world, but I think we're, you know, 55th in terms of in the league table in terms of the sort of digitisation of our cities as well. I think that we just need to really concentrate on getting that infrastructure in, so that everybody, you know, the Generation Z people are, you know, connected as they expect. They expect that in every aspect of their life now. The cars they drive or don't drive if they're living in cities. But we need to find a way of unblocking that impasse at the moment, because that, and making sure that the infrastructure is there throughout the city, not in pockets where some places have it and some places don't.
John, Deloitte have even got a department or a division called Deloitte Digital, haven't you? Which I happen to design for you, by the way.
Right, okay, fair enough. You probably know more about it than I do in that case.
So what's Deloitte's view on what we should be doing with cities in terms of the digital age?
Well, I mean, bringing it to Manchester, clearly for Manchester to compete in a global economy, and if you look at the economic sectors that it's trying to or has invested heavily in, and which is providing the platform for the economic growth today, to attract those businesses and to attract the type of people who will be employed in those businesses, if Manchester doesn't get that aspect right and really embrace that moving forward, then that will be a major disadvantage. Equally, something that can clearly be invested in now. Needs to be incorporated, needs to be, as I think David said, needs to be a citywide thing, because there is an issue here about inclusivity as well in terms of the digital agenda. So I think all of those aspects are really, really important.
All right, last question from me. If we zoom out of this and say, what are the big issues? What are the big challenges in this housing sector? You know, is it social infrastructure? Is it the actual physical shortage of good housing? You know, what actually are the big issues? Diversity, inclusivity. What in Manchester, you know, if you stood back and look at a sort of policy initiative, what do you think the big issues are? David, maybe you could take us away on this.
I think a lack of good stock, but that is now being rapidly addressed. I think social infrastructure is going to be a real challenge, but as long as the schools, the health centres, the hospitals, the dentists come within the whole fabric of new development, that should help. And only by doing that will you persuade people to stay within the city and have a family and have a long life within the city. Because otherwise you'll just end up where we are now, which is people tend to stay to a certain age, then they move out of the city into the suburbs to bring up families.
Mike?
I'd like to see a continued focus on not only the importance of the buildings, and we can probably talk about the internal space standards that's coming to fruition when we finish, but the space around the buildings as well. We mustn't forget the importance of those spaces in between buildings, the spaces that connect buildings, spaces that people can enjoy when the sun's out, or designing the buildings so that they're orientated correctly, so that actually that courtyard in the middle does get sunlight at certain times of the day, people's balconies look out the right way. It's just those simple things that we all need to thoroughly enjoy the places in which we live outside of the apartments or the
But if I took it to, and as an architect I could appreciate the design agenda, but if I just, does Manchester have enough good stock, per se, of housing?
Stock of housing?
Yeah.
I think that, well, I think the city centre is obviously dominated by high density, 1-, 2-bedroom apartments, some 3-bedroom apartments. But I actually think that's okay, because not too far away from the city centre, and we've seen in David's presentation that northern fringe that goes all the way from Victoria Station through Collyhurst, Ancoats, Piccadilly, locks into the Etihad. That's a sort of a rich seam of opportunity for maybe a slightly different type of mix of housing that still is within arm's length of the city centre. People can walk from those areas, get back into the city to enjoy all the other facilities.
So plenty of potential.
I think the city has potential.
Yeah. John, what about you? What are the big issues?
I think for me, I mean, during the recession there was a complete pause in residential development, and that's now started to come back. In fact, we did the Deloitte Crane survey for Manchester, which published at the beginning of the year. The construction levels on site now are at a level that's higher than the pre-recession average for a 10-year period before that. So it is coming back strongly, and there is a lot of residential development in the pipeline. I think what we have to be all sort of really focused on is making sure that what's actually delivered creates a legacy way into the future, a legacy of quality, because there's a vast amount of housing that's potentially going to be delivered over the next 10 years. If you look at the City Council's residential growth prospectus, it's saying a minimum of 25,000 new homes need to be delivered over the next 10 years to sustain economic growth. So we have to be focused on delivering the right quality, which will last into the future. And so that therefore needs to think about things like adaptability, resilience. It needs to understand that the climate's changing. You know, we've probably seen this winter. It's got a lot wetter and a lot windier.
Warmest February.
Exactly. You know, all of these things we need to get that right now, because we can't just keep going and recycling and redeveloping land. We have to get things right which sustain long into the future, and that's the way the city will really progress.
Great. Thank you all very much. Stephen?
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for your contribution. I know that you've got a dash, so thank you.
Sorry,
Good to see you.
I'd like to hear the floor discussion as well, but I've got to go.
Thank you. So I want to throw it open now. And the sort of themes that I thought I'd just throw into the mix, really, was that, I mean, the title of the discussion was very provocatively about Housing Generation Z. And I'd be quite interested to hear people's thoughts on, you know, is this actually delivering a good demographic for our city? In terms of PRS, we hear about, you know, the American model and the European model when it comes to amenity space. I'd quite like to hear views on that. But also for John's benefit, who's steering on the housing guide, I'd be quite interested to hear from people as to what you think the content of that should be. It's really an opportunity for you to say, you know, what should that housing guide consist of. You know, we haven't even touched on space standards, for example. So I'd like to throw it open now for questions to the panel. Who's going to kick it off?
Hi, good morning everyone. Michael Howard from Urban Bubble. I've met you all before. We manage about just under 5,000 units in Manchester city centre across the northern fringe, and I agree with you guys that the city's got an amazing opportunity ahead of it to deliver some quality housing stock. We made a lot of mistakes 10 years ago, and we're now managing those mistakes. I'd like to explore further what you think the city's doing collectively to make sure the outside space is delivered, because we see a lot of schemes, and actually it's not just about the apartments or the amenity space. What can be done outside with public realm, and how can we animate places?
David?
Yeah, just personal experience, really. I mentioned that we've just finished Sadlers Yard, so that's going to be almost like the soul of NOMA, and so we're now working on an events plan. And yes, some of them will be tied into the city centre and what the city's doing, but really important to us that it's a community space. So we designed it so that you can hold a big event with a stage, or you can just maybe just have a pagoda with somebody stood in there doing something very small scale. So that's like the heart and soul of the place. But then as you come out of there, it's, for me, it's all about having spaces where people would be happy to dwell. So we're very lucky in that we've got Angel Meadow Park. So as we are designing and working with the developers to design around there, it's how do we connect into that park? How do we make sure the future maintenance of that park is going to be sufficient to retain the quality? And that will be a key issue for the city, because, as you will be aware, their funding has been cut left, right and centre. It comes back to what I said really at the beginning. It's creating a community. It's creating a place that people feel they belong to. And I think if people feel they belong to something, then you change the heart, and the heart then means people actually go to places and are willing to be involved.
We talk quite extensively about this topic, but I think just one of the key things is about how you animate the public space. So it's about the quality of the uses that interface with the public space and getting that right. And I think maybe in the past what happened was residential developments had just token ground floor commercial units delivered as part of them, which just then laid vacant because either they weren't in the right location or there were unrealistic requirements in terms of rental levels, etc., etc. So there are many ways in which you can animate the street, front doors onto the street, but also in terms of the commercial units. I think just making sure that that they're given the best possible chance of being let. So maybe flexible leasing strategies and targeting some of the enterprise that exists in the city to create independent uses that will activate those spaces. And developments like NOMA, like St John's, for example, are really sort of, and the Manchester Life project are really embracing that strategy and realising that really adds a massive amount of value to the distinctiveness and the quality of the neighbourhood.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I think we can't underestimate the importance of green space. We all know what Piccadilly Gardens feels like, and that's getting a bit of airtime at the moment in the local press. And we need to look seriously at how we create those key spaces for the city for people to live and enjoy themselves. But in terms of residential, I mean, the key thing's very simple. Key thing with residential design is incorporating getting that hierarchy of definition between what's private space, what belongs to the resident, and what belongs to the community, and what belongs to the public, and be clear lines of distinction. They don't have to be barriers or fences, but there's an open acknowledgement of that's my space, that's a collective space, that's public space. But going on to your point, Michael, and I think we were having a chat in the bar last night about this one, is simple things like refuse stores. Designing them. There's lots of architects in the room here designing those things so they work. So the bin store is big enough for all of the bins: recycling, waste, glass, paper, cardboard. So on a Tuesday morning when the bin wagon comes back, past the pavements aren't littered with bins that don't fit in properly, because that causes a nuisance. It's not a very pleasant experience for people going about the business. So you've got very fundamental, simple things like that, but it's about defining the ownership.
I mean, I think it's quite interesting that you raised the issue there of private amenity space, because I think we have endless discussions about private amenity space and giving people choice. I mean, I'd be quite interested to hear your view on, what do you think the role is there a role for private amenity space? Do we need private amenity space?
Well, yeah, personally, I think I do enjoy my own private space. I think the difficulty is in a city centre with high density development, actually the most private space you're likely to get is a balcony as private amenity space. Outside of that, I think there is a community space which could be developed as part of a single development, which is retained by the actual occupiers of that building. Other than that, I'm not sure that you can deliver it.
There's a residential scheme in one of the Haffton City blocks and for owner-occupiers, and the developer deliberately left some flex space on the ground floor, and they didn't fit it out originally. They actually left it empty for probably 18 months, 2 years, and that wasn't because they couldn't get anybody in there. They could have let it to any number of people, but actually what they wanted to do was to let the community decide what the best use for that space was. And in the end, I think they decided, because of the demographic within that block, that a creche would be the most appropriate use for that space. So again, that's allowing the community to make decisions, make choices, which gives a greater sense of ownership, and then people curate the space a lot better as well.
Hello, I'm a developer. I live and work in Brussels, and I'm afraid I arrived a little late, so you may have already covered my question. But my question would be, we talk a lot about affordability and about reaching the market of first-time buyers in the city context of Brussels, city with 1 million inhabitants. And in fact, there's no offer on the market for that category of buyers. So we're looking very hard at what that is. And when I saw your title, I thought these guys maybe know something about that. Could you give me an idea of what distinguishes the demand from a Generation Z client in relation to other clients that you may have?
Microphone working? Yes. Yeah, my microphone is working. I think what we sort of touched on earlier on, in Manchester there is an issue with a sort of a younger demographic coming into the city and accommodating that within the housing stock. And there are also issues in terms of pathways to home ownership, so a shared subject really. I suppose the way that's been, that needs to be dealt with in Manchester is firstly, increasing the supply of new housing. Because of the recession, there just simply hasn't been enough. So it's simple economics, supply and demand. So there is certainly a need to supply new housing to keep the cost of living, which is genuinely quite well balanced with wage levels in Manchester, in line with average wage levels, but also finding it sort of what are certainly in the UK context quite innovative forms of housing through increasingly sophisticated rental products, which allow, for example, people to share and enjoy really high levels of amenity, fantastically well managed accommodation, which will sustain into the future. So I mean, they're the sorts of things that are kind of have naturally been happening.
But John, I mean, Ian and Rachel just left, and I was just looking at St John's. You mentioned St John's, and what I was quite interested in there, I know it's sort of very early days yet, but there's a proposal there for 4-bedroom apartments, I guess aimed at families. It's the point I was making about trying to recognizing the city needs a mixed demographic.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who probably of a similar age to myself who might I suppose have been brought up in a maybe lived in the city centre for a time, but then start to have families and move out to the suburbs basically. I think there is part of the reason for that is because it's leafier and you've got all the amenities, you've got the parks, you've got the schools. Undoubtedly, they're the key factors, and that needs to be addressed if we're going to have families in the city centre. It's absolutely fundamentally important. But it's also because actually there isn't a choice. There isn't a housing stock. And I've had discussions with different sort of stakeholder groups who have said to me, basically, if there was an offer within the city centre, we would look to live there. We'd love to have stayed in the city centre and brought up families, but there simply isn't the right offer, and there isn't the right social infrastructure in place at the moment, and that's starting to happen. So places like Ancoats and New Islington are starting to address that now. You've got the free school coming in. You've got beautiful marina. You've got the health centre. It is starting to get the facilities, and that is starting to be addressed now. So it does look positive, but that clearly there's a long way to go around the city centre to create these neighbourhoods.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, if there are any. No. Okay. Right. Well, look. Thank you to David, Mike, and John, and Jack in absentia for a really interesting discussion. And tomorrow at the same time here, if you'd like to join us, we're going to be debating community and innovation around the project of Circle Square, the former BBC site on Oxford Road. And joining me will be Chris Oglesby of Bruntwood, Ken Knott of Select Property, Keith Bradley of FCB Studios, Ed Lister of Planet, and the reviewer will be Bruce Katz. Guys, thanks again for a really interesting discussion. Can you join me in thanking them, please?